Hi there, my name is Steve Snapp, and in this episode, I want to talk about some higher level conversations about ways that you can begin to define and drive or create the behavior that you want to create within your sales teams. And so the idea here is we're just starting to touch on what I'll call some light process modeling. We're not going to do process modeling in this video, but one of the key things when you're implementing Salesforce is that we always want to look at sort of three key pillars. We want to look at people, process, and technology. And in the first couple of videos, I talked about the whole philosophy behind developing a risk-free prototype and creating momentum. Here, I want to switch gears a little bit into a little bit more of the process people part of this conversation. And so what does that mean? Well, one of the things that we're eventually going to get to is we're going to get to a conversation about driving behavior through dashboards. And if you want to jump ahead, there'll be a link to that video where I go into more details on how you can use dashboards in particular to create or drive behavior. What I wanted to do here, though, is begin to define the kinds of behavior that you want to eventually drive. So here where we're really focusing on, or what we're really focusing on in this conversation is what are the results that we actually want. So the first thing that I like to talk about is defining the results that you want to accomplish through the behavior. That includes defining the results and then defining the behavior. So for example, let's say we want our salespeople to increase their close ratio. Well, that might be the result. And maybe the result really is to increase, dollars or margin per rep or something along those lines. Well, what's the behavior that we want? Well, there's a lot of different things that we could define. One of the things that I would look at is that I want to make sure that they're leveraging or executing on every potential deal that they could. Or let's say that I want to place a high priority or emphasis on maintaining relationships. Well, then I'm going to be looking at what kind of behavior creates the relationships that I want. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about the metrics that I'd use to measure it. So what we're really going to work on here is just what are the results we want, what are the behaviors that we want, and then how do we drive that behavior? So there's a couple tools that we use within the Salesforce world to actually do this. The first one is just some very specific dashboards and or metrics. The second is the user experience that we're creating, making it very easy to work within Salesforce to then provide the information necessary to drive those metrics. And the third piece of that is training. And so in another video, I go into much more detail on some of the techniques that we use for training. I'll just quickly say that inside Salesforce, we're going to have a training tab, and there will be training videos that describe how to do the various things and also teach your users not only what the metrics mean that I'm about to talk about, but how to actually influence those metrics. So in doing all of this, where we're really heading in this conversation is what are the key results that you want? And while you're documenting this and sort of, brainstorming on this, start to think about the behavior that produces those results. So results is number one. What is the behavior that produces those results? And number three what are the metrics that will then drive the behavior, which will then drive the result? Kind of a silly metaphor, but when the oil light goes on in your car, it doesn't take a lot of training to teach people what to do. What you should have done is maybe given them a metric of whether their oil was high or low, and then that metric would tell them whether or not they need to put oil in the car, and then that would keep them from having the oil light go on. Maybe gas is a better metaphor there. You've got the gas gauge. At some point, everybody's got different thresholds, but at some point you're going to put gas in the car, you're going to run out of gas. So the idea here is that as you define the results and as you define the behavior and define the metrics, I want to spend a couple minutes just talking about the metrics. So a moment ago, I said that you want, through the user experience and through training, you want to teach people how to do the things that they need to do in Salesforce to get the data that you want. But I didn't quite say that quite right. What I really meant is there's certain things they may need to be putting into Salesforce, but there's also probably a lot of things that we can get from other places. So when you start thinking about the metrics, I don't want you to limit yourself only to the data that a user puts in. Like let's say it's activity data or opportunity data. we don't want to limit ourselves just to what they put into the system. There might be data that we bring from other places. I'll give you an example in just a second. And using data from other places enables us to create a metric, a calculation or a score or a grade or a color code or whatever. And then we can use that to then drive behavior. So I love to do red, bad, green, good. And so I always like to create icons that essentially tell me, hey, in this particular area, you've got a problem, i.e. red, or you're doing great here, it's green, or you're starting to slip a little bit, maybe yellow. And then the idea is that people are thinking now in terms of, I always want to move reds to yellow and yellows to green. So as you think about the behaviors that you want, I don't want you to limit yourself at the moment on a metric that has to be driven by data people put in Salesforce. I just want you to think about, well, if I could show them a red or green dot on this particular thing, then what would I have them do? So one example that I use, and I've got other videos on our channel that talk about neglected accounts. So that's a very simple metric that calculates whether or not someone's had any activity, whether it's a phone call or an email or whatever, based on some time frame. It could be something as simple as no phone call in 30 days, they go yellow. No phone call in 60 days, they go red. Now that's a little too simplistic in my opinion to be super valuable. But if you then reinforce that metric, it becomes valuable. And I'll talk about that a little bit here in a second. So big idea here, what are the results we want? What are the behaviors that drive the results? What are the metrics that we can give to our user to drive the behavior? The other big idea in this is that we're teaching our people to essentially be owners, whether we treat them like owners of their business or owner of their territory or whatever. We're simply giving them not only information, but we're putting a layer of what I call interpretation on it. So the red, bad, green, good means, hey, if the number is supposed to be 3 and it's 1, well, then that's bad. If the number is supposed to be 3 and it's 2, well, then it's yellow or whatever. You get the example. So what we're really doing here is we're equipping our users to sort of, we want to treat them as owners, business owners of their own business, whatever that is, territory, whatever. The second thing that we're doing, and this ties into some of our other conversations about ways to reduce risk, is that we're giving information to our users that they can take action on. So we're not just asking them to give us data so we can beat them over the head in a weekly meeting that they're not doing enough. We actually want to give them information, and in giving them better data, better interpretation, we will get better results in return. So if we create a metric that says, hey, you want to keep these guys green, here's how you do that. You make a call every 6 weeks, or you have to reach a certain number of, a certain dollar amount with opportunities, or you've got to have a certain dollar amount of sales, or whatever the green is. Well, then you're showing them how to go from red to yellow, yellow to green. And you're giving them data that enables them to do that. And if we're talking salespeople in particular, at the end of the day, you're giving them tools that will enable them to make more money, and thereby the company benefits. So that's a key element of giving to get. And like I said, we're defining the results, and then we're showing them how to get there. So as you start to kind of work this out on some, scratch pads or pieces of paper, again, I don't want you to get too caught up in what the metrics, how you calculate or where the data comes from. I want you to think in terms of, if I gave them something simple to drive a particular behavior, and if they did that behavior, they drive a particular result. That's where I want you to kind of stay. So let's talk a little bit of kind of practical. How do you do this? First thing I'd like you to do, in previous meetings when I talked about momentum, I talked about this idea that you might be having internal meetings, and hopefully you're on some kind of rhythm now. One of the first things you should do in one of those first meetings is to develop a short list of results, 3 to 5 results, let's say, that you want a salesperson or a customer service person to accomplish. Then you want to define the behaviors that produce those results. And then finally, you wanted to define the metrics that will inform the user on the behavior, et cetera. You get the idea. So results, behaviors, metrics, keep it simple. And in another video, I'll show you kind of how to start to capture that and put that into some of the process documents that we talked about. But for now, get it on a whiteboard, take a picture of it, get it on a Post-it note. Where you have it isn't as important as you start to go through that process. And so finally, let's just talk a little bit about next steps and how to get started. So in previous videos, I've mentioned that we have the risk-free prototype approach. And if you're not currently doing the risk-free prototype with us and you are ready to start, then obviously get the NDA signed that was in the first email we sent you, and let's get a meeting scheduled to kind of work out the details. Now, I said if you're ready to start. If you're not ready to start, don't waste your time doing an NDA. Don't waste your time getting on a phone call with me if you're not ready to begin the process. What you can do, though, is, as I've said in other meetings, you can start the process internally. So you can, in the next video, I'll show you how to take the project document and begin to make decisions and begin to structure that. And if you're not ready to do the risk-free prototype, but you are ready to start meeting with your team, let's say weekly or monthly, then go ahead and start that process. Start to get that documentation filled out, start to consolidate and to curate the other existing documents that you have in your team. And when you're ready, give us a call. And if you have a question about just a quick question or not sure how to do something, feel free to put a comment on our YouTube channel or shoot me an email or get on a call with me. Happy to help you start that process, even if you're not quite ready to do a risk-free prototype. And with that said, I'd like to thank you for just taking the time and making the investment to watch these videos. And I look forward to working with you. Thank you.